I just want to ask that people enter this video with an open mind. Some of the terms are going to be pretty socially loaded. I'm going to try to be as clear as I can, but with the video topic, some of these are pretty necessary. Thanks. So, I understand that autism gender is widely regarded as a joke, and I understand that. I thought the same way for a long time. It's a pretty silly idea. But after giving it some thought, I feel like I have a better understanding of autism gender, but also gender identities as a whole. So I figured I would share. Unfortunate naming aside, it seems to be pretty similar to gender fluid or non binary, but instead of kind of shifting genders or being like a gender centrist, if you will, it's more of like an apathy or like a disconnection from your gender identity. Someone who is autism gender or apagender, I think it's also called, um, is generally going to be less pushed personally toward gendered activities specifically. So, as an autism gendered individual myself, if I were to wake up tomorrow with a female anatomy, not much would really change about my life. I bleed more and get to wear more interesting clothing, but that's about it. As far as I can tell, the only real reason for the strange nomenclature is that for whatever reason, among autistic people, it's quite a bit more common to feel this way towards one's gender identity. Otherwise, maybe it's just a teenager that wanted to call themselves something weird. I think a good example of a public figure that could be considered apagendered or autism gendered is the political live streamer and commentator Destiny. He previously thought that he was non binary, then later said he probably wasn't once he had a better understanding of what non binary actually is. But based on the way that he's described his gender and his relation to his gender, it seems like he's probably apagender or autism gender. And I know if he heard this, he would almost certainly cringe because I'm pretty sure he's made fun of autism gender in the past. But I think if he put some thought into it, he'd probably agree. At the end of the day, though, it doesn't even really matter. At its core, autism gender is about not caring how you identify. So most of the time, people who are autism gendered either don't know or they just identify however they were identified at birth. It's kind of silly to make a whole separate special thing for not caring. It just seems pointless. Next, we're going to enter some rougher waters, so bear with me because I'm going to explain how neogenders and non binaries and all of that fit comfortably and safely into the idea of transmedicalism. Generally speaking, transmedicalism is the idea that unless you experience gender dysphoria, you aren't really trans. This is something I largely believe in, but not in the hateful way that I think a lot of people believe it, so just hold on and let me elaborate a little bit. So, the issue that we face here is that the term trans has become extremely broad, socially speaking. It can refer to people who are transitioning, it can refer to people who have no interest in transitioning, it can refer to people who think they have the soul of a deer, it can refer to non binary people. It's really broad and it causes some confusion. And not only that, it causes a lot of infighting in the trans movement itself, let alone the outside perspective on the issue. One of the issues with overly broad terms, especially in such a divisive subject, is that by saying everyone is equally trans, you're essentially handing transphobes piles of straw men to knock over. Like, they see the vastness of the trans community currently, and they say things like, oh, that person identifies as a deer. Are trans people really valid? Like, it's a stupid argument, but you're just handing it to them by not drawing any distinction at all. So even if you think that them making dumb arguments makes them look dumb. It does to some people, but to the people who are interested in anti-trans sentiment, they're going to take whatever you give them. So it's important to be cautious about things like that. I think the best way to illustrate my point is to go through each perspective the way that I'm perceiving it, and then we can see just how widespread this issue of like a simple lack of distinction actually is. I think we'll start within the trans movement itself, and just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to be using the terms dysphoric trans for those that experience gender dysphoria, and non-dysphoric trans for people who are not experiencing dysphoria. It seems that dysphoric trans people often dislike non-dysphoric trans people because by being non-dysphoric and still considering yourself trans in the same way that dysphoric trans people are, you are entering a community that is built on hardship and discrimination and shared trauma without experiencing a fraction of that hardship. That might be a contentious view, but I think in a community that has this kind of a foundation, it's extremely important that its members have such a powerful shared experience, because in doing so, you're laying a very firm level of trust between the people of the community. And if not everybody has that experience, you are assuredly sacrificing some degree of that cohesive community. As a non-dysphoric trans person, to be shunned by dysphoric trans people is extremely difficult. You have to understand that even if non-dysphoric trans people don't experience the same degree of discrimination, the same degree of social pressures, they still have that internalized social isolation, that feeling of you're not quite fitting in. You don't have the same experiences fully because you don't identify yourself internally the same way that the people around you do. Even if you don't have that horrid feeling of gender dysphoria, you still experience some degree of psychological incongruence. And to be isolated from social groups, and then to finally find a group that you feel like you will be accepted in, and to be told you can't be a part of that group because you aren't trans enough, you have to understand how devastating that is. The perpetual self-cannibalization that occurs inside of the trans movement is not only damaging to the movement itself, in that you are giving up a degree of cohesion that could otherwise assist in furthering your goals, it also is just a bad look externally. People who are more or less indifferent to the trans movement could see these people fighting over things that are important to the people that are fighting, surely, but from the outside, it doesn't connect all the way for people. I know this because I used to be in that position. For a long time, I had really negative views of trans people because of the projection that the movement showed of this radical and immature and angry person. Now, years later, having met a lot of trans people and having researched the movement and researched the ideas and the topics, I'm not like that anymore. But I don't know that it's good to trust the random person to go out of their way to open their minds to an issue that to them appears outwardly and inwardly aggressive. I touched on this before, but for the sake of completing the circle of perspectives, the perspective of transphobic people or anti-trans movement people is, I mean, essentially you are revealing your weak spot to them by arguing amongst yourselves. And like I said before, also, you're just handing them straw men to beat down. Like it's just better if there's distinction. It makes it easier to defend your position, and I don't necessarily think that people who don't experience dysphoria, I don't think that they're not trans, but I just think that it's not helpful not to make the distinction. And I think that people who aren't either traditional kind of trans, like people who are non-binary and that kind of thing, shouldn't be called trans. Or if they are, they should, I guess, have another distinction, but I'm honestly leaning toward they shouldn't be called trans because I don't really feel like it's the same thing. Now, I'm not a trans person, so I guess you could argue that it's not really my place to say that, but just from a logical perspective of the situation, I think that that's probably the best bet. But who knows? As a bit of a closing statement, I just want to make it abundantly clear I consider myself a transmedicalist. I don't think that being a transmedicalist means that you don't think that people who don't have dysphoria aren't experiencing something. I think that they are. I think if you don't have dysphoria, it doesn't mean you're not trans, but I think that it's a different enough experience that it's worth mentioning. And I think that there's value both on a personal level to making that distinction as far as having everybody get along better, and for the movement as a whole. I think that making this distinction, it's obviously it's not gonna like be like the saving grace or something, but I genuinely believe that it could do a lot of good in improving the conversations that are had about trans people, about the trans movement, improving the connections that we make with each other, and improving a broader understanding of the experiences of the people around us, which I think is really important, and it's something that everybody deserves. Thanks. Hey, thanks for watching. This was my first time ever making a YouTube video, so I hope it turned out alright. If you liked what you saw, subscribe, like the video, maybe drop a comment. They're free. If you want to reach out to me, my email is on the channel. I also have a Twitter that I will put the link to in the description. I'm happy to converse about this with anybody who's interested. And yeah, I hope to see you all again. Have a good one.